student host?
Geoff and Rachel. Geoff is not here, but Rachel Bennett.
Okay.
I am here.
Oh, you are. Perfect.
Out of the two of you, who has a better internet connection? Either of you have internet problems?
There's a thunderstorm outside right now, and my roommate is also having review, so I don't know if I have the best connection.
Rachel's the host.
My connection should be okay.
Okay. Good luck. Let me know if you have any problems.
So, Rachel, you're aware that you're going to keep the time.
Okay.
So it's half an hour, 25 minutes per student. They're going to talk for 5 to 7 minutes, and the rest of the time is for review.
Okay. So
Um,
I'll let you guys know like when that 25-minute time period is.
right. So if you can just make a mark at first at the end of the 5 to 7 minutes. So you can say 7 minutes up or 5 minutes up at the end of the 5 minutes. That way they can go on for two more minutes. You can also use text to just write on the screen in big letters, 5 minutes up. Or you can sound an alarm. I'll leave that up to you.
Okay.
You can keep the time. So we're gonna start. We need to start with Ryan, who's not here right now. I have sent him an email, but we're still waiting on him.
Ryan says he's trying to join right now.
Okay, I don't see him here. Laura, do you mind exchanging with Ryan?
I do.
Okay,
I do.
that's fine.
He says the meeting isn't open, so I don't know if the host can let them in.
Would that be something on my end?
Tell him to copy paste the link and not click on the one in our PDF, if that's what he's doing, maybe.
Oh, that could be.
I sent him a new email just now asking him to come to this room. Okay, great. Ryan, you're here.
Yes, sorry about that. I was sitting there for the last 15 minutes and it said,
Oh, no problem. We're running a little late, so we're gonna start.
okay, I need to connect my desktop. Sorry.
Just to clarify for the timing, so each student has a grand total of 30 minutes in total, 5 minutes to present, 25 minutes for comments and things like that.
I thought it was 5 minutes to present, 20
At
minutes.
the end of the 5 minutes, sound an alarm that talking time is over, and at the end of 25 minutes, sound an alarm that review time is over.
Okay, gotcha.
So we have total 30 minutes, so we'll keep that last few minutes for the buffer.
Okay.
It says you have screen sharing disabled.
That shouldn't be. Rachel, are you able to make him co-host?
Oh wait, no, I'm able to get in now. Sure.
Okay, you're starting now. Perfect.
Yes.
Room 1 works well. This room 2 works well too. So I think we have to compress a little bit the time, but okay, go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So this is Co-Housing New Orleans. This is the full site axon. So for my vertical house was the main driver for this project. As you can see, it's formed from these kind of rooms that are plugged onto this this core on the side, so that it's very loose arrangement and rooms can be moved around for different purposes and sizes. And then my horizontal house drove more of the ground plan for this project. For the site, these were all of the houses and lots that were on the existing houses and lots on the site. And these are the houses that we were all required to keep. So this one here is French Truck Coffee. This is a steakhouse, and then a private residence. So for the existing vegetation, it was mainly just a variety of trees in people's backyards. And I've replaced most of those with new trees that are scattered a little bit more evenly. And then each of these boxes are planter beds for large scale gardening. So again, here's the axon of the project. Here's the ground floor plan. You can see where the building makes this donut shape that's been interrupted by one of the houses that we were required to keep. And then communal programming is fit into this kind of, into the periphery of the donut with small shops, a classroom, a common space and test kitchen, an outdoor classroom in the middle of all of these gardens. And then at the top between French Truck Coffee and the steakhouse is a public plaza that could be used for farmers markets or food trucks. And you'll see that later on. Here's the typical floor plan. As you can see, like in the sectional house, the rooms are arranged similarly to a shotgun, with a single entry here with a single long corridor with all of the rooms branching off of that. And then with the vertical cores evenly spaced around the building that go up to this roof terrace. Here's a section that is cutting through right about here. So you can see there's these double height kitchens, and there are a couple of, you can see a couple of the open terraces. And then in elevation of the far side of the building, you can see where those kind of what would be the porch on a shotgun house, and how those are punched into this kind of just wall of the building with the roof terrace above. And then this is looking in the same direction, but it's it's an elevation. This is a section. You can see it cuts through a lot of the rooms. So one of the ideas behind this is that all of the way that all of the units fit together, it is very hard to tell which unit is which lends to some enhanced privacy for the residents. And again, you can tell kind of the shotgun layout of some of most of these, with like here with this singular kind of corridor connecting the whole unit together. North elevation, we can see French Truck Coffee here and the steakhouse. And an east elevation where you can see the school that exists across from the site. So these renders are both taken from the external corridors. This one is looking down one of them, and you can see all of these, the punch outs for the porches. This one is looking across the site, across to the other side, in the same perspective that my section was taken as. And you can see all the kind of the farming would be happening at the bottom. Here you can see again the public plaza with what could be, a farmer's market or food trucks. This would just be a large open space that for a multi-purpose space or community events. Here you can see the outdoor classroom. So for the units, this is how all of my units fit together. There are 85 units divided between these 5 unit types. You can tell how they all fit together like a puzzle or like Tetris kind of. And it's very difficult to tell what units go where. I'll just quickly go through all of my unit types. So I have a very small single bedroom unit meant for one person. A 2-bedroom unit that would be meant mainly for like two roommates, potentially students. A 2-bedroom duplex meant for a smaller family. A slightly larger 2-bedroom duplex for again for a family if they wanted a second living room, and then a 3-bedroom duplex for an even larger family. And this is a perspective from inside of the kitchen looking out. You can see this large double height space of the kitchen with this large window that goes all the way up to this to the ceiling. And this cutout here that connects the kitchen with the porch where you could potentially grow things, have a small personal garden.
Ryan, that's the 7 minutes, just so you know.
Oh, okay. Well, I am at the end anyways. And here's a grid of all the slides. And then I can go on to my boards if you want to see those. And then Monisha, how do you want us to show our animations?
Oh, you can play it right now.
Okay, because I would have to exit out of this and then.
That's fine.
Okay. Oh no, where'd it go? I thought I had it open. Oh no, I'm not sharing it. Screen share. Okay. So this shows how I arrived at the shape of the building. You can see I started with this kind of donut that's, I just made it as big as I could for the site. and then I pushed in that angle to make it fit with the existing lots, and then pulled out all of the porches. Okay, that was my presentation. And I can go back to specific slides if you want to see anything.
This is Ken Schwartz, and I was actually just curious about how the units operate, how you access them. In some of the plans, it looks like they're single loaded, and other plans it looks like they're point loaded. Do you want to give just a brief description about how they're accessed and how they're put together as units?
Yes, so I can go back up to my typical floor plan.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks.
There has to be a faster way to do this. So you can see here that all of so there are these vertical cores throughout the building that connect to this external corridor. And then each of the porches that the units have come off of that with the doors into the units in the porches.
I see.
Can you zoom in, Ryan?
What?
Can you zoom in on
Yes.
that one?
Oh, here.
So it's both, and that explains it. And the porches serve as access points into the internal access within each of the sort of shotgun configurations. I see it. Technically, it's a little bit hard to read that, but I understand your explanation.
They are public porches or private ones?
Sorry, I couldn't hear you.
Are they public porches or they are private? What is the entrance of the home? Is the triangle?
So are these porches public? Is that what you were asking?
Yeah.
So they would be for each of the units. So no, each porch is private to the unit.
Sometimes they offer entrance to two houses.
No, they each offer access to one unit. So some of the units are split, like this one here. This unit is split between the porch.
Okay.
It's a complicated Tetris-like thing, as you pointed out, and complicated to really visualize how that works. The reason why I think you're doing this, I understand, which is that you have this very substantial structure lacing its way through the block. And at the same time, I think those porches and the way you're envisioning those porches is intended to break up the volume and to make it seem more modular and less monolithic as a structure. So I think the intention of what you're trying to accomplish makes a lot of sense. And it's clearly difficult to really orchestrate that sort of the many different configurations that lock together. It's intriguing. How you make something like that work is probably a nightmare of its own sort.
Yeah.
But it's an interesting ambition.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I think it's a good example of densifying in a modern way, as Le Corbusier and his modern architects did. It's like it has a lot of ideas of this kind of architecture building, all the building is on posts, and the lower level is totally open, and it has lots of public space and community space. I think that's a great idea. Maybe it's not so, it has not been so defined. You don't have time enough to work in the public space, I suppose.
Yeah.
But I think it's a good start to think in this way of inhabiting the city. I think it's interesting to make this kind of intermediate places that are public or semi-public, and I think it was one of the things in the project that it's very, very well solved. The problem with this kind of Tetris you made to put the houses, the only thing I think it's a little bit very, very difficult is how do you organize the water systems? If the kitchens or bathroom are more or less in the same line, so you can put all the facilities. I think it's the most difficult you haven't solved. It's natural. I think it's the most difficult thing in this kind of project. But I think it's really interesting.
Thank you.
Ryan, one last comment from me. The part of your scheme that I really like the most is the ground floor plan and the way in which you establish a form of community in which the different elements, the independent elements of that plan, the kind of free plan that you've created, interact with both the street and the gardens inside. And that sort of sets up the communal basis for the scheme. And then the units become the individualized parts that then rise up above for the full 7 stories or the 6 stories above that ground level. I think it's an intriguing strategy that you've utilized on the ground floor. And it's kind of abstract right now, but
Yeah.
it could be very interesting the way the gardens, the trees, and the massing of the structure create a very different notion of how that block operates compared to prototypical blocks in that part of the city.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And
No,
also,
I agree with that. And yeah, I think that's an important aspect. Can you hear me? Am I?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, the development of this hierarchy from community to privacy, I think, is really key in mass housing. And there are a number of things that I think you've done really well. One is I appreciate kind of simplicity of the basic bar scheme. And I think it's appropriate also that it's, I think, 7 stories tall.
Yes, there's the ground floor and then 6 floors of units above that.
Right. Yeah. I don't know whether you happen to be aware of that, but that's actually a kind of key breaking point, because you get higher than that. I think it's more than 70 or maybe 75 feet above street level. And then you have to switch to a different, more highly protective construction type, just because that's the height that a fire truck's extension ladder can reach. So above that, you can't evacuate people in a fire out through the windows and stuff. So anyway, that's, I think, also a good decision. And I agree with Ken about the ground floor and the fact that these communal spaces have 2 sides, and they both are looking at the kind of private defined courtyard green space and are also confronting the street. And then up above, the single loaded corridor I endorse in general, just because it allows a lot of light into the circulation, and you don't have to air condition it or heat it. And so even though it's less efficient in terms of circulation, it's got a lot of benefits and can be less expensive. The distinctive feature of your scheme are these porches. And I appreciate that idea. That is, that you have a kind of shared space at a smaller scale that's not accessible to everybody, but just to a couple of units or even just one unit. I think that they're probably and the fact that they're open on both sides and would have cross ventilation and everything is good too. It seems like they would wind up being more like back porches than front porches in New Orleans, and because, or they're kind of in between, because unlike a front porch, there are not a lot of people going to be walking by with whom you can interact. And
Yeah.
so, it would be kind of private, which is why I think of them as back porches more. I'm a little worried that they're kind of deep and therefore it'd be a bit dark. And the fact that it's light on both sides is probably going to mitigate that a lot, but it also would be a little bit tough to grow things in there. You'd really have to,
Yeah.
because obviously it's not going to get a lot of sun and not going to get any rain. So you'd have to take that into consideration. So it might be that those could be a little bit wider and be kind of more directed towards the garden side, and therefore be kind of part or widening of the single loaded corridor and become a little bit more semi-public than they are
Okay.
now.
Yeah.
Oh, I also wanted to mention something about can you show your unit plans?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, I think that there's a lot of internal circulation in your units. And normally you put the rooms on the street side there where you've got all the windows. Because at least in the US, there's just a code requirement that every sleeping room has to have a window. And it's also kind of nice because otherwise you either have to have no view or else everybody can look into your bedroom. So I'd be inclined to mirror that. But there are also ways that you could put the public space in between the bedrooms so that you don't have to have the corridor. And the modularity of it is really helpful, structurally and organizationally and so on. But I think it might be good to rethink some of the internal circulation and all that.
Yeah, I did try throughout this. That was one of my biggest struggles in this was multiple times I actually did mirror the internal corridor.
Mm-hmm.
And ended up landing on this scheme in the end. But yeah, it was definitely something that I found struggling about this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I think maybe this kind, maybe it's not totally legal. This way of ventilating, or I think if these spaces are big enough, they can become important places inside of the home and be very useful. So I think it's as an experiment. I think it's interesting to talk about this. There are, for example, some buildings of École Leclerc in Paris that they made an extra balcony for existing buildings, and they made this kind of solution. It's not a corridor, but it's also a public, not private space in the room. It's like a public for the house, or the people inside of the house, and it's quite interesting. I think it's true that there is a lot of space for corridors, but if they are big enough and they can be used as another thing, maybe you can have a long table along this side corridor or whatever, and it's a studio, and you should try to solve the ventilation of the rooms, maybe with some elevated windows on the back side, corridor or whatever. So you can have also this crossing ventilation that should be very important.
Yeah,
of the space.
I looked into putting raised windows, but it came in a little bit too late for it to show up in all of my drawings. I found my section. Yeah, it's kind of hard to see, and that's my fault. But I did start looking at how I could have kind of elevated windows
Okay.
that are, I think it's about 7 feet up. So you wouldn't get any views in or out, but you could potentially open that for cross ventilation.
Yeah, thanks. Another interesting thing I think you didn't take in account is the sun, the isolation. So because everything is it's like a almost closed building, and you have all the corridors in the middle, but in some places you need more. If you are facing to south or to north, it would be better to have the corridor in the other side.
Yeah.
So I think this kind of another input in your project, talking about how the sun is going to these houses, and trying to find a better way, and trying to solve it with the general distribution of the building. That it's not easy, but it's a next step to do in this kind of project.
Yeah, I'll definitely look at different ways I could do that and think about how I could solve that. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have, next we have Herman, Joe.
Hi, sorry, I'm just pulling it up. Hi, I'm Joe. So my project is called Urban Reconnection, and it's about connecting a community through greenery and through common spaces. Here you can see a little bit of that in my axon, but I'm going to get more into it further. I wanted to start by talking about the houses that we had to work on earlier this semester. So while I didn't end up deriving any of my actual plans or sections or anything from my houses, I learned a lot from them, and I focused a lot on nature and how to integrate that into a home and how to make it feel comfortable. So for example, my first house was called the Honeycomb Home, and it was about integrating this massive courtyard. And then my second house was all verticality, as you know, and I wanted to include balconies even in a very limited space. And then my third house is a little bit experimental, but it kind of allowed me to explore juxtaposition and different shapes as a way of still being in habitable space, which I thought was really valuable for this project. And then I also studied specific rocks for my stair project, which focused on kind of creating this outdoor kind of climbable sculpture. So this is some site observation. I have an axonometric of the site as it is right now. The white houses are the houses that won't be moved. And then I also have my plan, which kind of just shows the same thing. And then here are some pictures. There's the remaining residences So there's French Truck Coffee, Charlie's Steakhouse, and then one private residence. But I also in my project have decided to keep two of the original houses and refurbish them as greenhouses. So those are also shown here. Just so you can get a sense, they're like the two houses right behind Charlie's Steakhouse, which I'll elaborate more on. So like I said kind of earlier, my whole project is about collective greenery. And basically it aims to bring together a neighborhood through collective green spaces and allow for food production and natural growth in an urban setting. And all of the interior programming on the first floor is public programming, except for the greenhouses, which are reserved for the residents so that each resident has a plot that goes with their apartment. However, there still is communal space that is accessible to the whole neighborhood through an orchard that's publicly accessible. And here's just some precedent. I got really into VTN architects during this project. I love all of their work. And so I also wanted to show some of my process work and some of my sketches because I did a lot of iterations of this project. As you can see, I kind of always had the greenhouses there, but basically I worked a lot on this project and I went out and I like drew trees. I got really into it and I got really passionate about the preservation of like the natural greenery here in New Orleans. So basically this is how my project works. Again, here, just so you can kind of get an overview of the block. There's, here I have, there's a little animation of just like kind of the first houses coming up and the first floor going down. But basically I refurbished those two houses right behind Charlie's Steakhouse, which is on the corner of Dryads and Gina, as greenhouses. And then I also have public space that is directly related to the greenhouses closest. So I have a public market, I have a restaurant, I have a juice bar, and then I also have next to the orchard, which is number 14, there's also like another public market. But that said, there's also like other spaces. Every single space, like I said, on the ground floor is fully accessible to the community, with a daycare, a library, a conference rooms if you need to like do a business meeting. And then I also forgot to mention this, but I also put in a pond to collect water to irrigate the greenhouses, which is number 13 on this plan. And then, so again, this is what I was talking about, where I have like on the diagram on the right, I have the everything that's like utilizing the fresh produce. And then like what's not utilizing the fresh produce. So as you can see, they're kind of oriented towards the greenhouses and the orchard. And then on the left, I have like collective green areas that aren't necessarily for like gardening or for growth, but they are just like accessible public parks essentially. And then I have circulation showing also like how accessible they are. And so this is my typical floor plan. Basically, as you can see, each unit is divided up, each tower is divided up into 2 units. And the way I have them arranged is I have like unit A and B together and then 2 unit C's together, with a very long like communal entry space. And the idea with that is you get to know your neighbors and you become friends with your neighbors, you garden with them, you talk to them. It's to create a community, not to create an apartment complex. And so again, here you can kind of see, I have another diagram showing like my vertical circulation core next to my interior shared entryways, and then the exterior promenade, which is outside. And the idea with that is that you get views of the city and views of the entire co-housing, so that you feel connected to your community no matter where you are in the building. And again, I just kind of have that animation showing like the units going down with the circulation cores. and then the exterior horizontal circulation, and then just the roof. So here I have a section that shows kind of how you would inhabit it. It's cut through a greenhouse, through my tallest tower at 5 stories, which is in the middle, so that it doesn't, it's less disruptive than it would be if it were on the outside. And then I also have it going through one of my duplex units, where you can kind of see there are these massive windows that allow you to really engage in the trees right outside your window. And so I have, again, like this is kind of just like the ground floor experience that you could kind of just like be there. It's a public park. It's a public place. And then again, this is like that external promenade. You can see people like hanging out on their balconies. You get to know the people you live with, because your circulation, your vertical circulation, like to get to your house, isn't directly tied to having to walk across and meet a bunch of people. So if you're outside, it effectively acts as like one gigantic communal balcony that you can go and you can hang out with your friends. Sorry, that's my cat. And you can just, basically it's another form of interaction. And then so here I have each of my units. I have 3. I have my 1-bedroom here, which is mainly designed for like a college student or like a young adult. And it shares that communal hallway with the 2-bedroom, which is again kind of like a starter home or like a couple of roommates. So the idea is that similar people at similar stages in their lives share that same like hallway, and they kind of, it acts as almost this like little living room where you go and you say hi to your neighbors when you see them every day. And it's a space where you can talk and you can like interact with them. And then I have my 4-bedroom duplex, which is my unit C. And again, I group that off with another duplex because the idea with that is it's more of a family home, and families tend to want to socialize with other families. So yeah, here I have that with that similar, like community space. And then one more time, just here's my axon, because I know there was a lot and I'm going really fast. But here's like kind of just the overview. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jo. Jesus, I don't know if you would like to start. The floor is on yours.
Yeah, it's quite interesting, especially the way you approximate to the place and the program and whatever. I think it's a really interesting way of understanding the place and proposing a quite sensible solution. And you are densifying quite a lot, but you are making it with taking care of the rest of the space of the plot, and I think that's quite remarkable. The only thing here, I think, is there are the only thing that shocks me a little bit here is all the corridors you have made to be everything connected in every floor. Maybe you should think in a way of connecting not all the floors, or maybe with different levels, and try to reduce the number of corridors, common corridors that are crossing and making some kind of dark or quite dark place in the middle of the floor. But you can imagine that you can change these 4 corridors in the middle and transforming them to 2 squares, elevated squares with double height or something like that. It could be also quite interesting, and you would reduce all the surface of public corridors. But the rest, I think, it's quite nice, and the presentation is very nice, I think.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bruce?
Yeah, Jo, could you go back to the collective floor plan?
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh wait, I think I passed it. Sorry. No, I didn't. I'm sorry. I've been doing this for so long. Okay. They all blur together. Okay.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out where these balconies or connecting corridors are.
So they're like right. Here, I'm gonna just zoom in. I don't know if I oh, I can. That's I can't. Okay, they are. Oh my goodness. Hold on. I'm just gonna pull up my InDesign because it's easier at this point. But basically, here I have it right here. And this doesn't want to work either. I'm so sorry. I don't ever work on my laptop.
You can use annotate and just circle and draw.
Yeah, good idea.
I don't know how to do that.
It's at the top where you're sharing your screen. You click View Options and Annotate.
Big time. Okay, thank you
And
so much.
if you hold Alt and scroll, you can zoom in on InDesign.
Thanks,
Got you. You're killing it.
Am I? Okay. Here, I'm just gonna try and just. I'm so sorry about this, but basically, where there's like vertical, I'm trying to explain it while it's not showing up. Okay.
So you can move, Joe. You can move your mouse, and we can read with your.
I'm trying so hard. Okay. Basically, I have right there. We go. Okay. That took us forever, but we got it. It's really blurry because it's not in print preview, but basically this corridor right here is what corresponds to like that communal entryway. And so the idea is like you enter like the vertical circulation from the bottom, and then you like kind of go up and you have your own little like entryway without an entry hall in your home, where it's kind of just like it's a place to stop and talk if you want to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a really good idea, but it just seemed like in the perspective renderings that there were all these horizontal corridors.
There's also that. So basically I'm trying to find here. So in my axon right there, those the yellow, those are like horizontal exterior corridors that are like walkways. So you can kind of do the stop and talk once you're inside if it's raining, or you can do this stop and talk outside if it's not raining. And the idea is kind of just like, it's just so you can kind of just like walk around and be outside without having to like go a place. You can step outside on your own private balcony, but if you want to socialize and also be outside and be in nature, you can kind of just like go outside on this massive public balcony.
Yeah, I'm anxious to see that those balconies in relationship to the units in plan, because in a way you've combined two different circulation patterns, the single loaded exterior corridor horizontally and the point loaded vertical circulation in between.
Yeah.
And so because you've set it up so that each unit can share a vertical circulation, and you're identifying those as a communal space, a space that's shared by 2 units per floor, it seems like that can become more room-like and less like a corridor. But I don't think that the continuous balcony is is really going to be that much of an advantage and might be compromising of people's privacy and security if anybody can walk by. So depending on which side that continuous balcony is,
Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, there's definitely, like, I definitely didn't consider, like, security concerns, as much as, like, I definitely should have. But also, it's not like it's like you come straight out of that, like, circulation core, and then you, like, are immediately, like, outside. There is a door, it's kind of hard to see, but there is a door that, like, you can close off. So, like, yes, there is, like, there's definitely, I would say there are issues with, like, people being able to see onto your balcony at a point. I do agree with that. But also, like, they can't walk into your home.
Right.
If I could add to this, well, quick question for you, Joe. If you had to choose between a point loading strategy and the massive public balcony, as you put it, which of those two would you choose? And I have my own opinion about this too that I'll share.
Personally, to live in, or like as a designer?
Either one or both.
I would say I like the public balcony. It feels a lot more open and it feels a lot more connected. I think like point loaded, while it can be like, it has a lot of benefits, like it's compact, it's safe, it's like very easy. I just, like, as a person living, every time I lived in a building with one of those, I've just, like, felt like I live in prison.
Well, they don't have to be prison-like, but the reason I would choose the point loading for your scheme specifically has to do with what you have right now, which is a conflict between the ambition of the collective greenery, which I thought was great and really a very interesting way of imagining this whole block, versus that web of these magically supported horizontal connectors. In theory, the horizontal connector idea could play out in interesting ways, but I think it's really running in cross purposes to the notion of having the idea of this collective greenery, which actually could work in your scheme very well without those present. They really do dominate the entire block on the inside of the block, which inhibits things like light and the way that trees can grow and so on. So I think the scheme, absent those elements, and you had an animation where things were kind of flying together and flying apart, the way in which the scheme looks and feels and relates between solid and void operates much more effectively according to your own agenda of this collective greenery without those pieces. And I think, as Bruce was saying earlier, there are real challenges actually with how that could potentially create public-private conflicts in the way that they're deployed. So I think that ambition for the scheme of how you have envisioned greenhouses, some retention of existing buildings and repurposing them, and then trying to wed together an increasing density of the block through the additional housing units that you're introducing, with a real respect for the land and landscape that you're creating, particularly on the inner portion of the block. That could be fantastic. And then one other just random observation that I had is that in that deferential treatment of the landscape, I've been wondering about whether the units deployed in a consistent orientation might be an advantage. In other words, right now they kind of spin around, and their east, west, north, south solar issues seem to be not so influential. And if they were somehow or another preferencing one direction or another, and really becoming more consistent in their alignment, maybe that too could actually be more respectful of or more deferential to the way in which the landscape needs to grow with light and with some breathing room. Those would be my two suggestions. It's really clarifying your initial ambition about the incredible importance of this collective greenery as part of your agenda for the scheme. One other just random thought. I love the kind of circular curvy unit that you created. It reminded me of Ant Farm, which is a really old reference. And actually one of the Ant Farm founders is a, from the 1970s, I guess, is a Tulane graduate as well. So you orchestrated that scheme beautifully, and it's not easy to create a unit out of those kinds of forms, but I thought it was really elegant.
Thank you.
Okay, Joe, that's your feedback. I think that your feedback are really, really well, and very agree with the comments of Jesus that you could even get more with your corridors, try to achieve more the particular character of the branches of a forest and urban forest, and try to play a little bit more. I like the way in which you face your project, taking risks, also a kind of experimental project. It's not the usual project. So that's, for me, it's a gift. And also in the way that you enjoy your project, because I know for sure that you have been enjoying your project, because you have changed several times and you never let you get down. So congratulations for your semester. And thank you very much for your feedbacks, because they were amazing. Thank you. I need to leave to another room, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
I would like to add something. You know, if you can go to the general plan of the floor,
The ground floor or the?
No, the typical floor. Yeah.
Okay.
I will break a taboo and I will draw something, okay?
Yeah.
You have, yeah, thank you. You have lots of vertical connections, one each building, so it can be a little bit expensive when you have all this corridor connecting for all the buildings. I can imagine some kind of outside stair sharing with maybe forestry and then these two or something like that. And making all these corridors as some kind of public, semi-public and live space, because now it's only for people of the same floor. They are not connected with different floors. And I think you can make the entrance of the building could be this here, and maybe make a big plaza or big square, and then some stairs going up and arriving to this building and then to the other in another floor. You enter in this other side and make this kind of not elevated and not repetitive solution, but even talking about this and activating these places as part of the entrance of the building. So you will have this connection with the neighbor more active than now, that you have to force to go outside to the balcony to talk to your people, to your neighbors. And the change of idea is making this place some kind of access to your home. So you must go through this, and so you must relate with your neighbors.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Good. Should I go then? Is it my turn? Okay. I will share my screen. And then, Okay. So, hello, good morning. It's nice to see you all, even if it's through Zoom. I'm Laura Gonzalez, and this is the Co-Housing Project. The name given to this project has been Panorama. And as you can see, this is a sneak peek, the isometric, the oblique of the building. So before I get into the building, I will talk a little bit about the design of the horizontal home, vertical home, sectional home, and the inhabited stair. So even if my designs weren't specifically following the typology I followed for each of the individual houses, I feel like there are some recurring themes. So for example, in the horizontal home, there was this design concern of an intersection of two squares, what would happen in the middle, and what did the footprint of the house would represent to the space, to the conditions of the people living there. For the vertical home, despite its very square shape, in plan and in section, it was about kind of pluggings of the usual square. And for the sectional home, it kind of it was kind of like a hybrid between both of those, and it created this step down, pulling off of each other's structure for the home. While for the inhabitable stairs, it worked in a structure that went up, and it was actually a greenhouse. So for precedents for this project, one of the ones that I was really interested in was the Stephen Hole Architects Void Space Hinge Housing Project. It kind of follows the typology of a linear block with the units kind of like protruding out of this one block. And then this project from NVR Architects that I really, really like, that I really love during this process, really inspired me. I felt like it resounded a lot with my other projects that worked kind of with plugins and with unconventional shapes made from rectangles. So going into the project, as you have seen probably already, the whole 9 blocks, you can see them here. And then in this site plan, you can see the houses that have been kept and have the kind of the available space we had to work with. And in axonometric, you can see it here in the shape of all of the houses together. So type of community co-housing. The goal, one of the most important goals that Margarita was talking to us about in the beginning of the semester is to try to make an argument as to how is this community, how is this space, how is this architecture, making an argument as to how this homeowner would have a better day-to-day living or better amenities than what they would have in their own individual lot and house. So one of the first ideas that came to my mind was the back of your house, your lot, is your garden. So to make this better than what you would have otherwise is to make a garden, that a space, an open space that everybody can share and everybody can co-live with. And so one step further to that, there was an exploration of like what it means to be outside and how to be active in this space. So in short, this community focuses on sports activities, just being outside, being connected to the outside, even if you're in your unit. So in this side oblique, you can see the kind of the proportions to the building, to the block. And then in this oblique, I can now explain, in the ground floor, there's kind of like a courtyard gridded system in which you have a basketball court, a volleyball court, a pool, a dog park, a children's park, and just a general open space that leaves a lot of opportunity for multi-purpose, for people to just, go downstairs, hang out, enjoy the open space. And this, while being inside this house, this building, the building now follows a typology of a linear block. And yeah, on the ground floor, there is very much attention to the program of being active. There's a gym, there's a lounge, there's a game space, there's a dance studio. Here's the dance studio, gym, the playground, dog park, the general open spaces. These are the proposed vegetation spaces. This is the circulation that is created by the gridded space. And so you're asking, like, how do the units work? So this is a building footprint, and as you can see, it is very unconventional. And I feel like that's what has carried on for my other projects. The units follow a grid, as you can see here. They follow a grid of 16, 12, or 10 feet. And it is a rearrangement of the bedrooms kind of being plugged in to the circulation corridor. So as you can see there, the elevators and the stairs and kind of like storage units are attached to the linear block of the building that then create a corridor where the service spaces are attached, and then the rooms, bedrooms, living rooms are what create this up and down footprint of the building. So yeah, in this corridor, you can see the circulation as it goes around. These are all the unit plans. So as you can see, all the humid spaces go along the corridor side, and then all of the other living spaces hang off, and all of them have a balcony to kind of reiterate that idea of being connected. So if you don't want to be outside, you can be in your balcony looking down into the courtyard, looking down at people being outside or whatever. So the experience, this is the elevation from the other sides of the street. Since the corridor runs along the outside of the street, you can people can kind of see on the street, but it also doesn't feel like, like a wall has been put up. Here's the elevation from Rome Street, and then perspective. Here's a perspective from one of the corridors. This space you see here actually is part of the design of this building was to also try not to make this like massive wall that you can see past. So in some instances in the floors, some of the units are taking out, there's kind of like a void space. And then it becomes this big lounge room that people in each floor can get together, and they can also be like hang around. This is the view from like being under in the courtyard, the view from one of the units. You have like your living room, then you have your balcony, and you can see on all the other balconies on the rest of the building. And this is another side of the courtyard, kind of looking at the courtyard and then seeing the building, and then kind of like enjoying all that open space you have. So yeah, that is these, I don't know why that's there. These are the boards, the layout. And here's the grid to show signs. Yes, thank you.
Laura, you said the title is Panorama. How
Yeah.
does that play out in the, how can you explain that as a theme?
Yeah, so I must admit, the titles have never been really my thing, but kind of like the idea behind Panorama was that as you could see in this perspective, you see the courtyard and you see the linear block of the building kind of like surrounding you and in your sight always, to kind of reiterate that idea of you being connected, and despite being on like different levels, I guess.
Good. That's kind of what I thought. And I think that view that you've just shown does a really good job of explaining how Panorama, how you wish it to play out, given the scheme's orientation around that the central space within the block. So that, to me, that's very clear. The aspects of your project that I really admire, both in the scale of the horizontal, vertical, and sectional exercise that you did, and in the way that you've developed this scheme, there's a lot of rigor and discipline to how you've developed the project in its technical orientations as a individual and collective expression. The collective expression very much focusing on that central space and the way that space cracks open to also connect to the rest of the block. So I think that's been very successful. It struck me as you were presenting your scheme that it's very poignant to listen to your comments about how this exterior space and the collective interactions that space would support operate as such an important counterpoint to the individuality of being in a room. And then of course that ties to the current condition that you and every one of us is in right now in our isolation. So it's a really kind of a poetic commentary on the current condition and how that can have an optimistic architectural expression tied to what for most of us is probably a pretty frustrating situation, and I assume for you too.
Yes.
So, but I really think that you've done a fantastic job of developing the scheme in its agenda that you have for this site. It is a very massive presence on the two street sides where it's exposed, and there clearly there could be a good debate about whether that's overshooting the mark on an urban context that has a much greater degree of delicacy. But the reason you did it has to do with the fact that it's deferring to a more modulated and undulated condition on the inside. So there's a kind of point-counterpoint between outside and inside. I do agree with you that it's not the same as a solid wall because of its permeability, but it is still pretty massive. And then it's punctuated and manipulated in different ways on the inside in deference to the landscape and the communal purpose. So really good work, very good work. And very good presentation for the scheme verbally as well.
Thank you. On your comments, I do definitely agree. That was one of my major concerns, was how to make this not feel like you cannot see past or that it is not accessible to you. And that is why the ground floor is very open. It's it is supported by columns, glass windows, so you can see kind of through to the other side of the courtyard, and it doesn't feel like you're being blocked off, but rather it is kind of like a window to see. As you can see in the ground plan, to the side of each core, there is an opening in which like it's just completely open and you could like go in if you wanted. So I think that kind of adds to the permeability of what would otherwise be a closed off wall with just like a door.
That makes sense.
I think it's an excellent work. Totally agree. The only thing is like, it seems to me a little bit introspective. So the central patio is the best facade, and all the volumes or whatever you were talking about at the beginning of the explanation is looking to the center, and the outside public space and even the outside facade is a little bit the back part of the building. So I think if you can make a next step and maybe work with these corridors going around and giving them making them a little bit wider, or generating some kind of balconies, public places, semi-public places where people can meet and whatever. So next to the stairs or whatever. And also this kind of volumes and this experimental way of understanding the outside space in a similar way than the interior one. I think everything here is looking to the patio. That it's very interesting. It also looks outside and make this kind of panoramic of the city from your balcony and corridors and whatever. You have space enough, and I think it should make a little bit more for this building. It's really nice.
Thank you. Unfortunately, this idea for like public balconies facing the other side came rather late, but you can see it in this floor plan where at each corner it kind of opens up and you're able to see to the other side of the street. And that would happen on some levels where you kind of open up from that corridor into the public balcony.
Okay, I lost it. Okay. So maybe making the corridors a little bit wider, it's enough. Then further in these balconies. This is another interesting point of the building where people is going to meet when they are out of home. They are going to cross them, the neighbors in these places, and I think they are very interesting too. So I will encourage you not only to look to the center, but also to the panoramic, to the surrounding. Yeah.
Thank you. I don't know if Professor Goodwin is talking, but I can't. You're on mute.
Sorry, I had unmuted. I had muted myself because there was a garbage truck outside. Anyway, yeah, I was just saying that I agree with Jesus's observation and suggestion about a little bit more communal space in the surrounding balcony, and particularly where you have the vertical circulation, because everybody's got to come up there anyway. It'd be kind of natural place to have a little elevator and stair lobby or something like that. But in general, I think the diagram is great. And you know what a geode is? This kind of rock that is very smooth on the outside and then crystalline on the inside. It's all marly. And so
yes, of course.
Yeah, this reminds me of that. And I think there are some really good buildings that are examples of that, like the Glesner House by H.H. Richardson in Chicago, or kind of a larger scale, St. Simon's Island Reserve by Charles Moore. And it's kind of intriguing then to come inside the building, because it's surprising that you have all of this articulation on the inside, where I think it's appropriate, because then everybody can get out on their little individual balcony and participate in the communal space and the trees and kind of natural landscape and can just sit there for a long time, because it's their own space as opposed to the communal space of a corridor. And then I think it's also appropriate that you have this single corridor on the outside. It kind of reiterates the sidewalk of the street. So you're basically putting the sidewalks up at these various levels. So I really appreciate the diagram, and I think you've developed it quite well, and just maybe a little bit more of that with kind of communal space associated with some of the vertical circulation on the exterior corridor.
Yeah, for sure. One of my earlier iterations had kind of that same playfulness on the outside, but with balconies. But there was a point where it got to be too much, and there was so much structure required that I decided to maybe step back and kind of reiterate the diagram that I had going on that I really, really liked. And I decided to going for taking out voids. As you can see here, voids where people would like a diagram where the corridor opens up and then it comes back in again, as you can see here. And it was it became more of that. But I definitely did think about that, and I completely agree. And if we had more time on this project, which that's what we always say, don't we? But I would definitely try to explore that, because I was really interested in that.
Yeah, I think you've done a good job at it. By the way, you mentioned co-housing specifically, and I think this is probably something that could be studio-wide. That the concept of co-housing generally is to increase the size of the shared public spaces in a dwelling unit, like the kitchen and dining room in particular, and then minimize the bedrooms so that a whole lot of people can live together, more like an extended family that might be 8 or 10 or something like that, in which case you probably have more more bedrooms than you have in typical market apartments where it's 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms only. And yeah, I think that co-housing is probably something that is, it's been around for 50 years, but it's likely to accelerate both because of the cost of housing and the preference, particularly of seniors, to live with a group of people, but not want to live in a nursing home, especially these days.
Thank you.
It's also about community facilities, maybe a big kitchen or whatever, so you can make this kind of mixes a little bit more deeper. But, yeah. Anyway, talking about the idea of the outside and the gym in the outside, in the inside, there's also one step more here that you would make in the next future. It's about the materiality, because if you can make the outside some kind of I don't know, opaque or not transparent and with dark colors or whatever, or maybe very massive, and then inside making the light, making the having some glass facade or balconies or colors or whatever that makes you or emphasize this sensation of entering to this kind of magical community space.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand. Was that a question or?
No. It was just a point. Just thinking that if you make a next step and start to think about materiality, you can also emphasize this idea of having some kind of jewel in the middle and emphasize this idea of discovering the inside when you go down the building and enter to the community space.
Yeah, I agree. So in terms of things I forgot to mention, I guess I could say them now. One of the struggles throughout this project was to that there was this playfulness in plan that I had kind of like I was struggling to incorporate in section, especially since section for this project, given that there was a courtyard enveloped by this building, was so important. Was that led me to kind of play with here the elevations and how each floor would be one level up and how this would create kind of like a diagonal going down and allow for that same kind of up and down that the plan had. And then on this terrace, then on the top floor, it creates this terrace space where people can also like go up and just enjoy. Unfortunately, in this oblique, I didn't have enough time to put in all the little furniture and everything, but I hope the program follows through with the idea.
I think you should study the isolation for this, because maybe you can make the elevated point in the place where more sun you have, and trying to make a little bit lower the points where the light is not coming inside of the
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ken and Jesus. We're running short on time, so we'll start with Taylor.
Thank you so much for everyone for their comments.
Thank you.
Good morning. So the goal for my project was to create a green community. And so giving all the residents their own private patios and a view of the sky and connecting them with nature in this urban context. And this is done through this use of a checkerboard grid and interlocking modular units. So before I go into that, I'm gonna go quickly over my previous work. So this is my vertical house, which is the stacking of different size rectangles. So you see that in plan, and then section. And then my sectional house is similar in that it's the collision of different boxes to create these different spaces and different programs. And then my horizontal house dealt with layering of different programs. So you can see there's a vertical layering of different types of uses. Inhabited stair, I worked with cutting into this 3-story stair to create more spaces where there's voids and more program. So before I started designing the project, I researched Grodat Youth Farm in New Orleans. So it connects youth in growing these crops and selling them and just engaging the community. So site observations, you can see the site is located right there in context with the surrounding area. So this is our site. You can see it's mostly composed of long, skinny houses. So I wanted to, the design looks into this relationship of these really tiny houses next to this larger building, this Sacred Heart. So exploring that relationship of how these two, like very small and very large, interact. So how it works. So this is an axon, and you can see those interlocking parts that kind of stack up near the back to create this tower. In the back, there's duplexes, and that tower is also duplexes stacked up on top of each other. The first level is all public and commercial space. So it remains pretty open with mostly deck space. Let's zoom down. And that's the other side, so you can see that tower a little better. And you can see these extrusions from the floor, which kind of create these courtyards and little cutouts on that upper level to give them more communal space. So this is an exploded axon, which shows the first floor a little better and the cores a little better. So you can see they're mostly just extrusions from the above units. So green space was a big focus in this design. So you can see the center is where the agriculture is. So that's where they grow the crops. For the surrounding program, which I'll get into in a second. And surrounding that agricultural area is this forest. So it's less manicured and more trees and stuff like that. And then this is a diagram of the private patios that the residents have. And then the corridor and core. So these are all the different types of units. There's 8 units. They're all different modulations of just a single cube to create these units which will come together and interlock. So you can see that in axometric view, all the different types of units. Near the back, there's duplexes. So this is the first level. This is the public and commercial level I was talking about. So you can see there's on the left is more like the fitness center. You have the yoga, gym, pool, and then in the middle is cafe and the juice bar. And then you have community kitchen and lounge. And then another building has laundry, mail and lobby and offices. So those are more kind of residential programs. And then the market and indoor and outdoor market is on the right. So this is the first level of the residential. So you can see all those, how all the units come together to interlock, and they form these private patios, and they're connected through these corridors, which kind of interlock with them also. You can see those extrusions from the corridor, which create communal gardens and patios for residents. So that's the second level of duplexes. And then that's just the tower duplex, and that's the second floor. So this is it in section, cutting through two of those voids. And this is it cutting through that larger center void. The Dryads elevation, the Burn elevation, Jenna Street, Cadiz. So the experience, this is a view looking into that center void where the agriculture is, and you can see those above terraces and the units right there. And this is looking into, so this is more on the right side of the building, like looking into those two smaller voids. And this is a view of one of the units looking to their private patio. So the units range from 280 square feet to 840 square feet, 1 and 2 bedroom units. And in total, there's 44 units. So the maximum number of residents is 78. These are my boards. That's it.
Thank you, Taylor.
Taylor,
So-
can you go to a section?
Yes.
Yeah, it's really interesting to see a high-density Lurons scheme. I think this is the first one that has been predominantly 1 to 3 stories, with a couple of those kind of cool-looking towers that, or at least they look tall, even though they're only about 5 stories. Maybe we could look at the plan again, because I'm intrigued by the fact that there is a lot of green space and courtyard space, and yet it's so dense. So I really appreciate it. It's more like a townhouse than an apartment kind of paradigm. And so I think that you've done a good job working that out.
Thank you. Yeah, I really wanted to, the driving factor is just making sure all those units had these private patios, and if possible, having them open to the sky above. So not really having many people above you.
Yeah, it's it's closer to the typical settlement and development pattern that's on the site now, which is all separate single-family houses, except for they've been shrunk down and multiplied, and all of the spaces become more compact. But I think that it still looks like they're generous enough to be usable without having, you know, the kind of useless front yards that you'd have in a typical suburban kind of single-family development.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very interesting way of taking into account the neighborhood and the scale of the place. If you compare to the other projects we have seen, it's taking care of using this kind of fabric and make it very, very dense, but taking care of the volumes and the heights. I think it's quite interesting, really, really interesting. The only thing here I understand is a little bit, or worries a little bit, is this kind of, is that when you have a patio in different levels, or it's not a garden, it's like a balcony, so we're not thinking in the same way or in the same kind of green on these patios. And the other thing is about the privacy between some of the houses. When you connect one bar and the other, or you densify a little bit more, I can draw, just mark some of them. These kind of patios or these where rooms from one floor and then a living room and a corridor are given to it. It's like it could be a privacy problem in these kind of places. But the rest, I think it's quite interesting, especially this kind of agrupation that gives you the connection to the public space outside and inside with this intermediate patio that it's like a small private outside place that it's so valuable and people living in New Orleans, it's so used to have it. So I think it's really interesting.
Taylor, could you go back to the ground floor plan?
Yes.
Thank you. This is just sort of speculating. I think you've done a very good job with the scheme as you've developed it, and there's a logic to almost everything I can see that you've done. One of the things I was looking at was the way in which you have lifted everything up to a pretty high level in order to get all of these common functions to have enough ceiling and floor to floor height on the ground level. And then it sets up almost like a kind of platform that everything else springs from above, and that shows in the section. But the reason I'm pointing to this thing is I was actually just imagining another, a variation on your scheme that might work or might not work, I'm not sure. But right now, all of these functions are laid out as a horizontal set of relationships all on the same level. And then I was imagining what happened if you actually, for whatever reasons, tested out a way of actually aggregating some of these things vertically. I know that that would complicate the clarity of this sectional strategy that you have right now. But the reason I'm suggesting is that maybe having this entire continuous upper level sort of balcony overlook platform, maybe that could be disrupted in order to further emphasize your notion of this green community. So you have a consistency, you have a clarity, you've done what you've done well, but in some ways varying the assumption on that one respect. So for example, you could aggregate things in the corner, the bottom right corner, and vertically organize a couple of these functions together perhaps in a way that would potentially free up some of the requirement of having in fact, even some of the housing could go all the way down to the ground level. Right now, it's all separated up a floor. Do you follow what I'm saying?
Yes.
I'm not sure it would work, but it's actually a way of actually messing up the diagram in section so that not everything is located on one level and starts to aggregate vertically for certain reasons having to do with its relationship to the street perhaps, or the way in which certain elements of these programmatic pieces could combine vertically.
In fact, in this project, it seems to have to have a lot of program in the ground floor, if you take into account the number of houses that we have here.
Right.
So maybe this part of this can be just shops or whatever given to the city, not to the community, and or focusing or trying to put some houses in this ground floor could be also a good idea for solving this difference of this amount of surface of community surface.
And can you go back to a volumetric representation of the whole site,
Yes.
which you had before,
That's right.
with the site included? Yeah, thanks. I thought this was fascinating. Just it really does a great job of showing the kind of waffle-like organization that springs forth off of that upper level. And that's part of what tempted me to want to break it a little bit or open it up a little bit, perhaps in the central area, by intensifying it in some other areas, as you do already in this upper portion. So really interesting scheme though.
It seems to be more dense than it is in this drawing. Because everything is full and it shocks me a little bit.
Part of it is because of the way that it's all pushed up on this upper level. That's creating the apparent density. It's actually not as, doesn't have to be as dense as that appears.
Yeah, that was kind of something I was working with during the design, and I tried to solve that a little bit just with those like cutouts. There's two voids right there where it gets a little bit more dense, but yeah, that definitely was something I was working on, trying to balance that density.
You made another comment that interested me a lot in your presentation, which had to do with the scale issues from tiny to large. And I can see how you've been working with that observation about one of the challenges associated with its proximity to Sacred Heart and the notion that you are building up some significant density in portions of your scheme. How that plays out is really an important and delicate operation. It's sort of like a testing process that you would need to go through to see how far you could push it to accentuate your scheme's role in sort of reconciling amid those different scales that are operating in close proximity. So I think you identified a really important issue and a very hard one to actually resolve. It probably depends on a kind of trial and error process, and it's one of degree because of the way you're trying to capture these scalar relationships. It shows well in this axonometric or isometric as well, with the French truck in the bottom, and I think that's French truck down in the corner, isn't it?
Mm.
Or maybe I'm backwards. I may have it backwards.
I know, I think French truck is on the bottom, and then up top would be like the back of the Sacred Museum.
Yeah, so the way you've developed it right now is a pretty clear progression from that lowest level in the bottom corner up to the portions that have the tower elements that sort of communicate with the gymnasium or whatever it is on the back side of Sacred Heart. That's really, you can see what your ambition is and how it plays out. So that's commendable that you've actually accomplished what you've set out to accomplish. So that's good.
Yeah, this is an intriguing view because most of the schemes make the existing houses or buildings on the site look small, whereas this makes those buildings look really big and gives you an idea of how tiny or minimal each little wing of the of your kind of mat housing really is. It does mean there's an extraordinary amount of exterior wall. So there are some both economic and environmental implications of that. It's going to be expensive to build all that exterior wall. And there's also a lot of possibility for heat gain. Is there do you have a strategy about the orientation and about where the sun is?
I did think about that and tried to figure out a way to have the windows not directly facing the sunlight, but yeah, that I didn't go too much into that.
So we're looking at it kind of from the northwest, roughly.
Yes.
Yeah. So the parts that we're looking at that are facing north, of course, not going to really have that much problem. But if I can draw on this for a second, you know, these are going to gain a lot of heat. They're facing west. But that might just mean that needs to have some sort of sunscreen device on it. I'm kind of interested also in the fact that you put the swimming pool at a kind of outside the complex and right on the street and at a corner where it's quite public. So I think that might be really fun because you'd see just people driving by or walking by would see all this activity, you know, kids splashing around and stuff outside. But it's an unusual situation, and usually that's, you know, all fenced off and in the interior of the site.
Yeah, I also put it there kind of with the thought of connecting it with that program behind it. I know behind it there's like a track and kind of like more like open space like for the school where there's more like leisure activity. So kind of having that connect in a way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think earlier Jesus mentioned that there was a lot of public function interior shared space on the ground floor. And in this kind of a scheme where it's quite low rise, it seems like you could actually have a number of units of the actual dwellings, the residential units going on the ground rather than devoting the entire ground floor to the shared functions, because I'm not sure there'd be enough population there to support all of that. And having some units that are on the ground floor, especially for families with kids, you want them to be able to play outdoors and be still observable right outside your window. It might be a good idea. Then you could increase the density a little bit and have a kind of more realistic ratio of population to shared facilities.
Taylor, sorry about my scribble here, but if there were one thing that I would change on your scheme, it would be opening up that central portion, because I realize that sort of destroys some of the mat-like quality that covers most of the site. But part of the reason for that has to do, going back to your green community and GRODAT interest, it seems to me to be a fairly simple operation to give up some of the housing in deference to the central area that could be liberated in some ways. So with apologies for my wobbly sketching, that's the one thing I would do. And I think that the scheme, by the way, this view of the scheme is really great because it really does help to explain the progression of scale as it moves from the corner to the one corner to the other corner. And also there is an intriguing interconnection or mesh between solid and void in the project that I think is really interesting. But I would love to see more of a space somewhere that's collective, that really does a more emphatic job of bringing people together within the notion of this as a communal block in a way.
Okay, yeah.
Is there a reason that you left this area open over here instead of just continuing these in that direction?
I think that's more of the steakhouse program.
Yeah,
Oh, this is Charlie's Steakhouse right here, right?
Yes.
But they don't own that site, I don't think. In any case, it seems like you could continue your pattern.
yeah, that was just some part of the requirements. The actual urban plot is this one.
Oh, really?
So yeah, so I don't know if they own the other house or, but it's within the same urban plot. So but I have to say that Taylor struggled a lot to reach this level of let's say cleanness of proposal, cleanness of the diagram. Or radicality, but it is true that now messing it up a bit, as you're saying, like putting some units below, maybe getting this down, for example, completely, you'll get to the scale of the house. It will be much more clear the progression you're speaking about. And it is true that the agriculture, if the grow that is the main point, then it is true that the central square should be much bigger, right?
I think somehow it's some kind of provocation because we have seen the other kind of projects, and now this is a project that tries to fulfill all the plot. I think it's a good exercise different exercise to analyze if when you are talking about only 2 stories buildings, if you need so many big spaces in the middle, maybe just I think this analysis of this kind of project trying to fulfill everything and making the public space and this community space a little bit smaller, it's interesting also because you are talking about another way of living. We are not talking about an empty plot with the typical in Barcelona, for example, with this interior community space. So I understand the idea of trying to provoke and to give to make the scheme going to the last and fulfilling everything or almost everything. It's also a good exercise, an interesting one.
Yeah, I certainly don't underestimate how difficult this would be to make clean, as you say, Rodrigo. It really, it's evident that, you've essentially got this series of zippers that are all oriented in the same direction, and then it creates a variety of exterior spaces because so you got different sort of relationship between these and these, and then all of the kind of unique parts of the site like this and this. So the fact that it is so clear diagrammatically is not a sign of underdevelopment. In fact, the opposite, that it takes a long time to clarify things so that they look really simple like this.
Good. I think we can jump to the next one, or who is controlling time here?
I'm keeping track of the time. You guys are all good to go to move on to the next one. I think it's
Okay.
Jeff that's up next.
Perfect.
Jeff is next, yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi.
Okay. All right. Everyone can hear me? Ready?
Yes.
All right. Okay, so the name of the project is Rolling Hills. Here's a quick peek at an isometric, the way the project looks. Really quick before I get into the specifics, I'm going to go over the work we did earlier in the semester, but I'm only going to talk about the inhabited stair, the last one we did, because that's really the only one that I kind of took from. So my inhabited stair had this series of step terraces that you could read at. And I really enjoyed this idea of the sectional relationship between the terraces, being able to look down at the ones below and being able to proceed up them. And so I knew that was an idea that I wanted to play with when I got to the aggregation. So first we'll start with some site observations. Here is the 9 block that we were looking at, ours being in the center, and the 3 plots that we had to design around. I noticed that there was a lot of really awkward squeezes, especially this one right here between these 2 on the west side. And so one of the things that I tried to tackle with my initial massing was a way to kind of incorporate this little sliver over here on the southwest side, and not just treat it as like a tumor on the side of the massing. So I came up with 3 really snake-like bent masses that would encircle the entire site, so that it would maximize interior courtyard space and allow inhabitants to flow in and out of every side of the plot. Animation that I made, just showing how they're stacked on top of each other, and they're 4 different levels. And then the vertical and horizontal circulation fade in and out, just as a precursor to try and show you where those are. So here is the 9 blocks on. The site is like medium density mixed use, and I didn't want to design anything that was too tall so that it stood out. So I was really trying to keep it down to the low to the ground while also maximizing interior space. 4 stories was the height that I opted for. It seemed to have a good balance of integrating with the height of the surrounding buildings and liberating courtyard space. So here we are back at the isometric. From here, you can see this network of curving paths that leads you between the buildings. And you can also see on these step terraces that there are these little rooftop gardens. The rooftop gardens are there to facilitate gardening of vegetables and fruits for the residents to eat. And it kind of checks off the like sustainability and self-sustainable food, so you don't have to rely on outside sources so much. Here's a view of one of these narrow corridors, this one right here on the west side, just to show what the experience would be like to walk around. You can see here that there's earthwork kind of on its own to create kind of like separations between spaces to kind of separate the interior space from the exterior space so that people aren't just so
I'm not sure if
easily tempted to walk in off the street.
Were you able to hear Jeff the last minute? Sorry, I didn't want to to interrupt. Just continue, Jeff. Yeah, sorry. I thought you were frozen and I couldn't hear. I don't know if the rest can hear.
No? Oh,
Yeah, I could.
Okay. I guess we'll keep going.
Yes, yes, continue, please. Sorry.
And then here are the floor plans. This is the ground floor plan. From here, you can see the placement of the earthwork mounds.
Jeff, you're
middle.
I'm still seeing the
of the court. Yes.
Sorry, yeah. Now, yes. I think we're having a bit internet issues. We were seeing your perspective. Now we can see your floor plan.
Okay. I'll slow down between the transitions then to try and counteract it.
Fine.
So here on the ground floor, you can see that there's this main large courtyard and then smaller paths with little green spaces in between the curves. All these spaces are designed for the residents to meet each other, talk with each other, have picnics outside. Children can play in this central area where there's 3 big mounds positioned around each other to create kind of like a earthwork playground. And one of them even has a little slide on it. And then here in this building, on the second floor, you can start to see some of the rooftop gardens popping up on the lower terraces. One in each separate building. On the third floor, you can see even more gardens popping up. And on the fourth floor, even more. The gardens are positioned on the south faces so that they can get maximum sunlight, but without just, having like a straight up like extrusion out of the ground. This diagram shows where the main circle blocks represent cores and the straight lines represent the horizontal cores. They're stacked on top of each other, and the only places that they tend to vary are on the terraces where they just step down. And then here is a diagram showing that all the wet areas, like the ends and the bathrooms, are stacked on top of each other to make it easier to route the plumbing. In this elevation, or in these elevations, you can see really the street, so that the building's not a front yard, even though there's an absence of a front yard. With this design, this section is taken right through the middle, looking north. You can see the main courtyard on the right side, in between these two volumes, with the little slide. And on the left side, you can kind of see the terraces going up. This section is cut through the rightmost building looking west. And you can see how, if you're on the top terrace, you could look down onto the one below. And there's exterior stairs here to take you from one to the other. Here are the floor plans of the units. There are 3 unit types, a triple, a double, and a single. Yeah, the triple has 13 units. They're quite large, so it's difficult to put more than that. The double has 24 of each one, the triple being darkest and the single being lightest. Avoid like a kind of strict blocking and separation between different inhabitant numbers. And here's the axon again.
Can you see the axon? The final one? Ah, okay. Can you leave the can you leave the second slide, no? The next one with the axon?
Number 2?
Yes, I think it's number 2.
This is the same one.
Yeah, this one.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. I guess I haven't met you in this room before. I don't know if, who wants to start. Maybe Jesus?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. I have these 2 important comments. I think it's a 3. It's a different exercise because we are not talking about closed or almost closed block. So the first question is just how do you imagine the space in the middle? It's a community space. It's a public space, semi-public, or can you imagine some kind of fences closing it, or not? It's totally open, so it's useful for all the citizens. This is for the other one. Okay, yeah, please. Yeah, Jeff, please, if you can answer.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question? My internet connection is kind of breaking up.
Yeah, it's the public space is public, semi-public. It's totally open for people from the city, or are you imagining any kind of fences or whatever closing it?
I wasn't imagining fences. I was kind of just assuming that people wouldn't really come in. It is intended for just the residents, but I don't think it would be entirely closed off.
Okay. So talking about this public space, just a reflection that you have very rectangular and geometrical buildings, and then you're talking about you're drawing a public space totally pure and this kind of natural landscape. It's not true, and I think you would find you should find a language more related to the buildings you are proposing and making some having some sense between the building and the public or landscape you are making here. I would recommend there are many public spaces with this kind of forms and talking about these strong geometries that are solving also with different levels the possibility of having different uses in the same public space. I remember, for example, Eduardo Arroyo's Plaza del Desierto, it's a desert square in Baracaldo, in Bilbao, that is somehow parametric place with rectangular platforms in different levels, with different materials, and giving you something more related with the buildings you are proposing here that has this that have this kind of strong geometry that then is not you cannot see it in the landscape. So I would encourage you to experiment, to try to make a public space more related to the geometry of the buildings. And the third thing is about the volumes and asking you why the volumes are like this. And because I can imagine this kind of cuttings related with the sun, with the isolation. And I think it should be very useful in this project to draw the shadows of the buildings in different days of the year on the plot, so you can understand if these terraces are looking to the south, how and why, and how much sun is going inside of the plot, or if you need to protect even in some places with more vegetation or some shelters or whatever, this kind of things.
Hi, Jeff, I think that you are sharing, I don't know, what do you see? I see Bruce.
Really?
Really, yeah, can you just, but we have in mind your project, but if you could share it again.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
If not, you can stop sharing and share it again. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd like to jump in here. These stepped kind of schemes are intriguing for me, and I think often offer some opportunities. They're usually challenging in terms of some of the legalities, code requirements for two means of egress, but it's possible to do it. Of the three buildings, it's this one up here that is, to me, the most successful. Let me see if I can annotate on this. I'm going to go to a little bit wider pen. Get that out of the way. Because it seems like this one has this clear strategy of a tall block on the street, and then it's, obviously stepping down towards the interior. And it seems like that could actually also be part of the water management and greenery system, where you collect water up here and then it kind of flows down to there and so on. And then it comes to some retention pond in the middle. So I'm curious about why you decided to reverse that in this corner where it's kind of more characteristic in New Orleans to have the tallest building on the corner in these residential neighborhoods. Not that they're tall, it'd just be 2 stories or 3 stories maybe, but be right against the property line. And then next door, they'd be lower. So I'm tempted to suggest that, these also kind of go down towards the center, and this one just would be reversed, with the tall part being on the corner as a kind of anchor, and then moving down towards the inside, so that the whole interior is lower scale, and it's you have all these green terraces then that are on the inside of the project, and then in terms of the requirements for fire exiting, you'd have the main elevator and stair at the tallest part, of course, so that it can go to all the floors. But then you can go outside when you get to the place where it steps down, and then have the exterior stairs that you're describing that kind of come down, and then could come all the way down to the ground there. And that's where that'd be an alternative way for all of these people in all buildings to kind of come down to share the green space at the middle.
Yeah.
Did you consider doing how did the stepping and their particular orientations, how did that develop in your design process?
Well, I was mostly focused on orienting them to the south because of sun directions. I was afraid that if the terraces were stepping north instead of south, then they wouldn't, the plants wouldn't get enough plants wouldn't get enough light to grow.
You mean the plants that are on the rooftops?
Yeah.
Yeah, there'd be a certain amount of self-shading for sure, but the build that each story is not that tall. The roof terraces are wide enough, so and there are a lot of things that grow in semi-shade. And of course, during the middle of the summer, the sun is directly overhead, so it's not going to be an issue there.
Yeah, you can also use the terraces for other things, not only for planting. So you can have other public uses on the terraces. They will also work. So I think this point, Bruce, I think it's quite it's really, really good, and I can imagine the place in the middle and this approximation to the ground level, using these different platforms and making this kind of game of going up to your building, just crossing some terraces. It's like a lovely way of understanding the entrance to your flat. Yeah, it's nice.
Just if I could pick up on Bruce's comments, I think one thing you've discovered, Jeff, which is an interesting discovery, is that your inspiration was clearly the inhabited stair exercise on. And I think that's a really, really great project. It's a little project, it's a short one, but you came up with some really interesting spatial relationships on the scale of basically an expanded room. But going back to Bruce's comments, I think what happens is that you're sort of infatuated with this idea of the inhabited stair and applying to a very different scale, the scale of the building, scale of the block. When that happens, it's not to say that you can't transport one idea that has one scale to another setting. You certainly can. And I think that could be great. But at the same time, other issues start to enter in and mediate or mitigate the nature of the original inspiration. So it's an issue of scale, but it's also then an issue of how buildings operate very differently or with a different set of parameters and circumstances than an individual room, which essentially what inhabited stair exercise was. So I think that's an important lesson, if you will, and it's good that you experimented with it, because translating one idea into another realm can often produce some pretty exciting results. There's one other thing about your scheme that I think is really strong, and it's at the scale of the individual units. Your units are really well thought through, and I very much like the way in which 1, 2, and 3 played out, using the similar or the same assumption about the wet wall, and at the same time taking advantage of what happens when you start to expand into those larger scales of a larger unit. So that was a really disciplined part of your project that I think has worked quite well for you. And interestingly, it doesn't really have anything to do with the inhabited stair. It's your application of an architectural agenda that needed to play out to create effective units that are really at the core of the scheme. So I like Bruce's suggestion. I realize the orientation issue is something that you thought about, but the benefits of what he was leaning toward or pushing around in your scheme could be that you could have the best of both worlds in terms of interpreting the inspiration, your inspiration, and making it work as effectively as you possibly can as you deploy it and transform it on the site.
Right, yeah.
Right now, it seems, and I don't know if this is what Bruce saw in it, but it seems to me to be a little bit random. I mean, clearly there is this deflection to the south that you mentioned, but then again, this corner doesn't quite do it in the same way. So it seems a little random, and it doesn't seem to work at all the same way at the scale of buildings as it would in the context of the inhabited stair. Clearly, there's a difference in those two situations.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I think that maybe the massing of the projects, we addressed that during the course of the development of the project. Maybe we try to maybe make it a bit lighter also, I think that the terraces need a more variety of uses, and maybe to study a little more those exterior spaces, both in the building and the terraces, and maybe the garden also. Was the idea of the garden was some kind of English garden with the reference of the Robin Hood gardens of the Smithsonian that also are pretty much like this type of garden, like maybe similar what we have here in New Orleans in Audubon Park, and maybe just a little more of detail in the design of the exterior garden in relation with the building, and also those terraces could help the project a little bit. But also, Geoff, I think that you have achieved, like, the typologies of the units are very well measured, the spaces, and the interior spaces are pretty real and buildable, no? It's like very much stick to reality and to what architects we do. Just want to say congrats, and I think that the project is very good for the track that we have had during the course. Yeah, maybe this part could be also a little more like the terraces started the stepping down and maybe make it a little lighter near the remaining unit here, the house, the previous house. But I think that the rest, like the orientation to the south, it can be a good decision, but managing also some kind of maybe ephemeral roofs or something, like working on those exterior spaces. But at the end, the project, like so far, it's has achieved a very good quality of development in general. So congrats
Thank you.
for the last impulse. Yeah.
Can we take a look at the unit plans that Ken mentioned? Because yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah, those are quite clean. And I guess one thing I would mention is that in a 2-bedroom, it's very common to see one on one side like this, 1 bedroom on one side, and then the other on this side, so that you don't have to have a corridor. And it seems small, but in market housing, that they're looking for every inch.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it works well with the bathroom. I think it's also a good idea to have this corridor in the middle. The only thing here is maybe the laundry place or something like that is the only thing that is not in this unit, but it can be a common service or something like that. And I think they are very real as Elena told. I think they are totally, yeah. I think we are making something similar to this now in Barcelona. So it's like a typical and well solved unit. Yeah, maybe not too experimental, but it's. I think you need to also to understand this kind of well solved house to try to experiment in next future projects.
As Jesus says, it's conventional, and I mean that in a really complimentary sense, because so many architects have worked on housing, literally millions of housing units, and so the result of all that work is a certain type, and it's kind of been refined by a whole lot of people, and so it's really difficult to significantly change and improve it, because almost everything has been thought of, and
right.
So I kind of appreciate the fact that you've recognized what the characteristic type form is, and have just straightforwardly exploited that. You don't have to invent everything at every level. And the level of the apartment unit or the hotel room or the dormitory room, it's not the place where you want to use all your creative energy, because
right.
It's just not going to be rewarded.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, yeah, good work. I think we can move to the next one if you stop sharing. I don't know who's next.
Okay, yeah.
Okay, I think that's me. Let me just pull up the screen share really quickly. I'm gonna set a timer real quick. So can everyone hear me okay? Yes?
Yes.
Okay, good. My name's Rachel Bennett. And for my housing project, I wanted to focus on this concept of voids and how to create community in and around these spaces. And I was really inspired by this tribe in South America, and their housing that they have, it's like a ring, and all the families live around this circular ring. And in the center, they have community events and festivals and things like that. And I really liked the dynamic that was established through the architecture here. And so I kind of wanted to figure out, how do I recreate that in this urban block? And so that was a major piece of inspiration for me. And this project in China, which was a kindergarten, I really enjoyed the contrast between the exterior and interior, and how they kind of took a similar concept of having this circular ring and creating this fun, playful space for the children to interact with one another and come together. And I just really liked the surprise of coming into that space. And so that was another big precedent piece for me. And this project that was done in Budapest, which was I believe a landscape project, but this kind of ramp that's circling around, and the community that it creates, and the circulation it provides, I really thought it was really elegant and graceful. So I took all of those concepts. Some of the projects that we worked on, the horizontal house, I worked a lot with circles this year, save for the vertical house, but the sectional house as well. It was all like, how do you work with circles and rectilinear forms and kind of contrast each other, and yeah, kind of combine those elements. And this was the multi-story stair. I kind of had this like snaking thing going on. So I also wanted to kind of work with like, how do I inhabit those areas around the void? And so this is the axon of my project from the southeast corner. And I really tried to go for a rectilinear exterior, circular interior. And so here in my floor plan, you can kind of see all the different programmatic elements that are occurring. So I kind of use the apartments to form kind of a sort of ring to kind of shelter the interior space, so that it becomes this sheltered place for community to gather. On the lower floor here, I have all sorts of amenities, such as like a tennis court, a playground for children. On the lower floor here too, there's a bunch of businesses. There's a fitness center, some co-working spaces, laundry facilities, a grocery store, a pharmacy, deli, bakery, daycare, all the amenities you could need in an apartment. Library up here. And yeah, moving up, we have some more unit typologies that are showing up, and a little bit denser in terms of the residences. And then the top level here, there's some more open spaces. So I made some garden areas where residents can have community gardens, and there's like a little restaurant lounge area up here. And all around each of these circles here, I just have planters and benches and places where people can kind of gather and congregate and sit and look down into the middle and kind of have these different interactions with one another. This is the eastern elevation. And then if we move forward, we cut into the section through the main courtyard here. And so you can kind of see some people enjoying the benches here, and just being able to kind of come together and gather in this central space. There's a few different unit typologies. The smallest one that I have, I subdivided the entire plot into a grid, and each of the squares of the grid were 15 by 15 feet. So the smallest unit occupies one of those squares, and it's just a small studio apartment with a living room that converts into a bedroom. And so I figured like younger kind of transient people can come in and out, and they're very flexible units. So those occupy the upper portion of the building. And here's just an axonometric of it. And then here I have the 1-bedroom apartment, which is a little bit larger, separate bedroom. And yeah, here's another axon of that. And then I have the 2-bedroom apartment, which could be available like for families or roommates. And then here's an axon of that. And then I have the largest one, which is a 3-bedroom apartment, which could also occupy families, roommates. So yeah, it's a very large unit. And here's an axon of that. And then here's an interior perspective of the 3-bedroom unit. And this is on the southeastern corner of the property. So you can kind of see in the background the Gym of Sacred Heart. And then this would be kind of facing towards St. Charles. just to give you some context. And then this is just standing in the kitchen looking into the living space and the exterior porch. All the units have this porch feature that kind of wraps around and provides a little bit of shade. So when, you know, from some solar protection, and also just a space to go out and enjoy. And then here's that southeast corner from the exterior. So when you're approaching the structure, it looks completely rectilinear. You really can't see that circular courtyard at all. So it's a complete surprise when you're entering into that space. And when you do enter into that space, this is entering from the eastern entrance, and you're kind of opened up into this big garden and this play area, and it's very fun and bright and open and a perfect place for community to gather and come together and have fun. And so I have just like some sectional cuts moving through in an axon view, so you can just kind of see the general structure. But yeah, that's my project. I don't know if you have any comments or anything you want me to go back to. I can scroll back through.
Yeah, Rachel, could you go back to the unit plans?
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, is there a collective a view of the collective plan, just in plan?
Let's see. Oh, I think it's lagging a little bit. There we go.
There we go. Yeah.
One of the things I forgot to mention was the way I kind of organized the different unit typologies. The largest circle here, where I had the perspective view from, I wanted that to be more family friendly. And so a lot of the units that are around that are the larger ones. So the 3-bedroom and 2-bedroom units. So I figured a lot of families would live in that area. Whereas up in this area, I have more of those single bedroom and studio apartments clustered in this area. And this circle here is a little bit quieter, and it's more just like for small social gatherings and things like that.
I think there are I can understand two really interesting things in this project. First of all, is the way you make this flexible dimension unit. So you can imagine in the next future changing some of these big ones into small or something like that, because the system should. Maybe you can think in changing the distribution of these houses. I think it's really interesting. And the other thing is the relation between the private and public, and the way you so important the public space and the place, a place that is totally full of use and giving the access to the houses and having really an active community space. I think it's very interesting, and I think it's very well solved here. The only thing I saw is I think there are some problems of privacy with some bedrooms given to this community space.
Yeah.
But the rest, I think it's quite intelligent to make this kind of very, very active intermediate central points, public points. So I think this is going to become, this should become like a very interesting community place. So congratulations. Maybe it should be a little bit more open to outside in some places, using the public or the common facilities connecting the inside of the community with the outside of the building. But I think it's a good exercise of thinking how people is going to go from the street to their houses and how this path or this path is going to be interesting and how they will interact with their neighbors. Maybe you don't have an elevator, and I think this is. I was thinking if it was good or bad. I think it's good because maybe you need an elevator, but do you have one?
Yeah, right over.
Okay, yeah. But it's not the main thing in the building. So people is going to use the public space to arrive to their home. So it's nice to emphasize this use and to force people to go through these corridors and these circles to go up. I think it's very interesting.
Rachel, could you show one volumetric representation as well as the ground floor? I mean, obviously 2 different views.
Wait, sorry. So you want the ground floor? Or do you want the
ground floor? Ground floor is one thing I'd love to see again, and then also some volumetric, whatever you think is the. There you go. Thanks. Let's just take a look at this for a second. Wait a minute. So that's the ground floor?
Yes.
Okay. And there are some units at the ground floor level, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, first of all, I thought your lead-in for this project was fantastic. The way that you looked at something, the concept of voids, as you put it, and then looked at these examples from vernacular tradition, the South American tribe and China. Really, really interesting points of departure and inspiration that you were intrigued with, and then wanting to try to see how that could play out in the context of this very different setting. But interesting that you're trying to pull that in and make it work somehow. I was concerned about, or am concerned about, the ground floor here in how this operates relative to the other floors. And it seems like there's a big difference between the 2 floors in how this would play out spatially, in part because this is sort of capped off by the entire plate or plan above and the large terrace form that you gridded out in this plan as well. So I'm a little bit concerned about that. One of the thoughts I had, and it picks up a little bit on what you heard a moment ago, I also thought that there could be an opportunity to actually open up on the upper levels more so than just the continuous wrapping mass form that you have right now. So that was one temptation. I mean, slicing through so that instead of having a complete wrapper, there were actually key points at corners perhaps, that start to open up. And that might actually allow you to have some spatial relief and some spatial opening on the ground floor as well. Mm-hmm. So it's not literally just covering the whole thing, almost the whole thing, except for the two circular elements, circular spaces with solid above a pancake. The second thing I thought of, and this is just my appreciation for the circle form and how powerful that could be. I was thinking, well, maybe it would be even better if you just used it once. And perhaps the larger of the 2 is the one you'd want to save. And then I question why you'd repeat that theme multiple times. I mean, I know you're interested in the theme, mm-hmm. but doing it once and doing it in a way that actually deploys in the space effectively, comfortably, functionally, for me, that would actually support your initial argument even better, that that's really the sacred communal space of this group, this group of people who are living together in on this block. And then the other ones could be maybe a bit more conventionally organized around a rectilinear space, as opposed to a repeat of, well, actually you've got 3 circles that are repeating: the big, mama bear, papa bear, and baby bear. You know, I think that the biggest one is the one that's the most important. And it's sort of deflecting and reflecting off to the corner as well, which I think could be very good. So I think the project, you push this project through with a lot of seriousness and a lot of discipline. And I'm posing some questions that could lead to a transformation of the scheme that could actually open up some other possibilities as well.
Mm-hmm.
but it's speculative. I will admit that.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that Ken has identified an important issue. And I guess there are two things that I think maybe could mitigate what I see as a couple of moments that might not be such a great experience. And one of them is in here in the on the ground floor, because it just seems like that's going to be dark. It's kind of a lot of one-story space that is not open to natural light. So that might be something you could address with maybe just more penetrations in that platform. I appreciate the clarity and the kind of ruthlessness of the conforming to the diagram. But one way in which the diagram on the upper floors is maybe stronger is that this is continuous all the way around. And I think you could make an argument that you want to make this isolated and really separate from the street, and that by blocking it off from public access from the exterior would do that. And also just because I'm always a little bit afraid of these open ground floors that are big and don't have enough activity to really sustain them. You know, I think of like the underside of the Unité de Habitation projects by Le Corbusier, or even La Tourette, where the ground floor is really kind of wasteland, because you have much more activity on the ground floor that it can potentially activate all this area. But I still am concerned about the proportions of the space, the height of it versus the width, and how that would just, I'm not sure what you would really want to do there. You'd want to be either right along the edge of this or right along the edge of the exterior, and probably more the interior, which is why I'm suggesting maybe you could have more units around the edge. What's the vertical circulation? Are these stairs that are going up?
Yes, yeah. It might be easier. I can show the axon here. Yeah, so I have the stairs just kind of wrapping in a slow ramp up towards the top. And so it's just kind of this procession that carries you all the way upwards.
Is there enough room for it actually to be a ramp rather than a stepped ramp like that?
You probably could. For my for my own sanity's sake, I kept it as steps. But I think that it should be, you know, easy enough. The circle has such a large diameter that I think you could make a ramp with it. I think it would definitely change the certain dynamic points and like where it would drop you off and things like that. I think a lot of things would have to be readjusted, but I think it would be possible to do it.
Yeah, ramps are really difficult to incorporate. They just get enormous really fast if you've got a 2 or 3 story building. So I don't know whether you could do it. I have no doubt that people on skateboards and bikes are going to be riding down that anyway. So whether there's steps or not.
Yeah. Talking about the public space in the ground floor, you have used again the rectangular thing to solve them, and you have this kind of so romantic idea of the circle and whatever, and then you box it and you divide it in squares, and even you put a tennis court in the middle or whatever. I think these spaces should be more free, open, or with not big elements that close or reduce their dimension. Maybe to enforce their potential of like a community place, not a place to be divided in many other uses.
The circle as a form can be really challenging in so many different ways. And one of the strategies that you might consider, this is just imagining at the moment, but you could actually take the circular form that you started with an inspiration and figure out other ways of deploying it by fragmentation. So, you know, it could turn into chaos, but one of the potentials that form has, that the kind of sinuous nature of the curves could actually be used in a way that allows you to take some of the mass away from the floor plate, for example, or adapt to accommodate unique circumstances. Like it might be nice to have a quicker way to get up, a straight shot with an elevator as part of that central experience. But the point I'm making here is that you can have a point of departure that then actually defers to another operation that can start to accommodate some of the practical dimensions of considerations of light, of access, sequence, structure, and maybe in some ways subversively attacking the sort of authority of the circular form could be a way to get there. It's tricky. I mean, it becomes almost a painterly approach to how you would create the plans, but it could actually accommodate a number of the episodes that you'd like to see happening anyway. So that's just a kind of verbal food for thought. It would be much better if I could draw it on your drawing readily, but it's all because you started someplace that was very, very compelling, and to your credit, you've been working to make that happen and work on the site and with this program. So that's it's been a good struggle.
Yeah, again, I appreciate the clarity of the diagram and the degree to which you have been rigorous about following through on it. And so, in fact, if anything, I'd be interested in seeing you be even more rigorous. For instance, in completing the square at the bottom. Because it's spaces like this that I'm a little worried about, because it seems like that going out to that is a lot of underneath the building area. So is there, what's your thinking there about leaving out a unit there or there, but not in most of the rest of it? Because if you have a client who's building this, that's the first thing they're going to do is want to get another unit in there, because it doesn't seem like that is an outdoor space that would be used a lot because it's on the top floor, and you've already got a more appealing kind of place to be in your scheme, which is right in here, overlooking one of the courtyards. So, so I think you could actually be, you could kind of complete the square on the first and third levels to some benefit.
I guess addressing that, one of the initial concepts for this project, including the voids, was to have the entire structure actually be kind of suspended up in the air. And so the idea was to create the middle level that's here, to have that be the solid and continuous form that goes around the solid plate, and then to only break it on the top and bottom levels. So that was kind of the rule that I set. I mean, obviously, like, you know, as with many rules, you can break them and change them as the design progresses. But in terms of like placing the different apertures in the building and kind of cutting away units and carving out, a large part was trying to create symmetry on some of the surfaces, and then also providing access points from the street. So because this is on a corner is one of the places where a lot of people gather, and there's, you know, this intersection here, and I know that there'd be a lot of people kind of coming from that direction. And so that was one of the primary reasons for cutting out that bottom portion there, and then reflecting that on the upper level. So that was kind of the rule that I followed. Whatever cut I made on the bottom, I reflected it on the top. And so, yeah, that kind of carried through. I guess the argument where you could say, you know, why not put a unit down here? But, you know, that's something where that could be flexible, and that's a spot where I could either remove it, or because it's right in the center, it could be another access point, or close it off. And I think it would still keep the conceptual idea. But I think definitely the corners for me need to be kind of an open space and an open aperture. I don't know, I just kind of feel like these spaces for sure need to be hollow underneath, but I think there's some spots like here and here where it might be a little bit more flexible. But that's
yeah, obviously there has to be a way to get into the complex from the street, but you really only need two probably. And the idea that there's a kind of skewer that's going right through there, so that you can get in there and you can get in there. I think that establishes a kind of sequence of being in a low space and then an open space and low and then open and low. And you experience all of the characteristic parts of the scheme. And I think that's probably going to, I would think, reinforce the idea, rather than, you know, duplicating that and having a bunch of other places that you get in, which are going to be much less used, and you know, also would just create a security issue. That is, that you do control who goes in there, and not just anybody, but rather it's for the people who live there. So, you know, having a controlled entrance and having that at a place where you can concentrate people a little bit better, I think would be an advantage.
I think if that's all the comments, I've totally forgot to set a timer. But I don't know if, when they expect us to be back in the main room, because I don't think there's anyone after me in the morning group.
Yeah. So I think we can go. There's been a bit of a mess with the rooms and the streaming into YouTube. So, but I think we keep to the original plan and we go back to room 0 now.
Okay.
So
before we lose the group, I want to just congratulate everyone. And these haven't been the easiest of times, but it's really great to see all of you tackling a really complex project seriously and really committed to producing something that you can be proud of. So congratulations to all of you.
Yeah, I'd like to reiterate that too, and especially with respect to the drawings. Every project is very clearly and beautifully delineated, and we were able to find out everything we needed to know by just going around with the various drawings. That's obvious that this was an important emphasis of of the semester, and I think everybody did a good job of that.
Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree. I think this idea of making these projects, these small projects before, and then trying to apply to a big or bigger project, adding them and taking inspiration of many things, some with the stars, other with the communities, other with the units. I think it's a good way of going step by step, following the students and giving them the issues to develop a complex project as this one, as this multi-housing project that is something that it's not. I think it's not very usual there in New Orleans, and I can understand that some of them are starting to learn about this way of living. So I think it's a good way of introduce them to this new, to this nowadays problem or requirement. So congratulations.
Yeah, I think it's a really complex exercise. Collective living, collective housing for second years. It's pretty complex, and I think this idea of splitting the exercise in going smaller first and then aggregating, I think it helped a lot for most of them in understanding the scale of the things, understanding the difficulties of aggregation. But yeah, I think it was a good experience. In any case, we could continue with comments of this kind in the general room. We have like 30 minutes to do a more general chat all together.
Great. Okay, so do we leave this meeting now and go back to the previous Zoom link?
Exactly. I just pasted here in the chat the link, but it was the same we were before, room 0.
As the host, do I need to do anything special, or should I'll wait till everyone copies the link and leave the meeting and end it?
If you're the host, don't leave yet.
Okay.
wait for them to leave, and you have to you have a more button down there.
Oh yes, I do.
Probably you'll have to stop the YouTube connection.
Yeah. Okay.
Did everyone get the link of the room 0?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's meet there then.
Okay. See you.
See you.